To be completely honest, men usually never hit on me or approach me at all. This is because I'm a very large woman, I think. It is weird when they do. It has only happened twice in the last 6 or 7 years. The first of those times was okay, but a little uncomfortable since I was in an elevator with this complete stranger in my apartment building and he kept asking me out for coffee. I know I'm not attractive, so I never believe people when they act like I am. I am also not looking to date. The second time, however, just happened within the last hour. After work, I took the bus down to the grocery store. It is a few minutes in the opposite direction from my apartment, but they have some pretty good deals, so I like to go at least once per month. As I was just starting to walk away from the bulk foods area, this is also the only store with the sesame glazed cashews, so I was getting some. I heard somebody say something like, "Hey." There were other people in the area, so I figured this person was trying to get the attention of a deli or a bakery employee nearby. I saw him out of the corner of my eye but paid no attention and walked off to continue my shopping. I had used the phone in the store that automatically rings up the taxi company to call my ride before exiting and walking off to the side where the benches are to wait for it to arrive. A few people walked behind the bench as they also left. Then one stopped and said, "Hello." I still paid no attention. The only person I talked to, besides customers at work, is my sister, and she was back at our apartment. He came a little closer, cleared his throat, and said, "Excuse me." I turned. It was the guy. It was then I realized he had been trying to get my attention inside the store earlier. "Oh, hello," I smiled. I really am anxious out in public, but I am decent at faking friendliness. "You live around here?" "No, I'm just waiting for my ride home." "Ah, I live just over there." He pointed at the townhouse complex across the street. "I can give you a ride if you like." Well, that was fast and forward. "Yeah, no thanks, but it's alright. I already called my ride and it's on its way." "Are you certain that they are coming though? Because it's no problem to drive you." I assured him that my ride was indeed on the way. He kept trying over and over though to get me to come with him despite my polite refusals. He offered to put his phone number in my phone so I could call him any time or day or night and he would come pick me up, he said. Well, that was creepy. I told him the truth and said that I didn't have a cell phone. He immediately challenged that by asking how I called for a ride then. I said that there was a phone inside the store that I used. He chuckled and asked, "Are you worried that if I gave you a ride, your husband would kill me?" Husband. Yeah, right. I am 35 and never had a boyfriend. Oh, he might. He can get like that sometimes. Better if I just take my cab when it arrives. I lied. Well, you don't have to tell him, that I gave you a ride. That wouldn't be very honest of me. Besides, the folks at the taxi company know who I am, so I can't just no-show them, which is actually true. I've been a regular for the past 6 years, and they know me by voice now. He then asked where I'm from. I said that I was from this general area, and he said that he was from Africa. So I just politely asked which country. He told me and then started talking about being from a tribe and how tribes would fight each other for things. Mostly about how whichever tribe won, they could marry women from the other tribe and not have to pay for that privilege and whatnot. I was just praying that my cab would come soon. I kept turning to check. Finally it arrived. I stood up and said, "Looks like my ride is here." He said that it was nice to talk to me as I was putting my bags in the car. I hopped in the cab, thanked the cabbie for finally saving me, and we were off. That guy must have offered me a ride at least a dozen times. But that wasn't the end of it. As I was getting my stuff out of the cab, once arriving at my complex, there are multiple buildings, by the way, and our parking lot slopes down a hill. I am at the top of the hill. The man drove past me. He doesn't live here too. He followed me. I don't know what he hoped to accomplish since the buildings are secured and he doesn't know my first name, let alone my last name, which is the only name listed beside the buzzer. I hustled my fat butt into the building and I hope I don't ever have to see that dude again. This is an encounter that happened to my wife and me back in 2016. Back then, we were recently married and really starting both of our careers and lives as a couple independently. As any couples in our stage of life, money wasn't abundant, so we adjusted expectations to making sure we got the cheapest rent in an area close enough for her work in downtown and not any seedy neighborhood. Now, Miami is very expensive when it comes to rent, and where we ended up renting a one-bedroom apartment was a neighborhood that 10 years prior, I would have not even considered. But the apartment we found was a 10-apartment semi-open air complex. All of the neighbors seemed calm enough and cool. A mix of retired individuals, young people and families in transition, a great first apartment, we thought. The first apartment we had was centered in the middle of the complex on the second floor. To get there, you had to access a central stairwell that had the complex laundry room right in front of the first floor. It's somewhat hidden and a great spot for shade from the Miami sun. The stairwell led to a cool, decent-sized patio area, which we shared with another neighbor. This encounter began on our day back from our honeymoon cruise. We had gotten married 4 months earlier, but had to delay our honeymoon due to work and money reasons. We got picked up by my mother from the cruise ports and traveled home, which was 10 minutes away. It was a Monday morning around 10 a.m. when we got home. As we rolled our bags towards our apartment staircase, we saw there was a young-looking guy sitting at the bottom of the steps, blocking any way of going up. He was wearing a brown vest, a black t-shirt, and jeans. He rocked an afro and had a goatee. As I approached him, I sensed something was a little bit off. He did not acknowledge my presence as I approached the stairs, so I said, "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I need to go up the stairs." He simply glanced at me for a second, got up, and walked away towards a little park in front of the complex. What I found odd initially was that he wasn't really doing much, just sort of staring into space when I first ran into him. My mom and wife were a little creeped out and worried. Now, we are all Hispanic, and my side of the family is Cuban, and my wife is Venezuelan. Now, I admit my mom is mildly racist, and it's kind of messed up, and that she bases negative African American stereotypes on all black people. It's pretty bad. And I don't condone it at all. This is just part of the story. So she was quick to suggest that the guy was up to no good. As somebody that grew up in Miami and has black friends, I refused to assume anything of the sort. I told him to calm down and rationalized he was probably waiting for someone from the apartment, and the stairwell was a good place with shade to wait. What I found weird was the blank look on his face, sort of as if devoid of emotion, but I didn't give it much thought at the moment. After we finished unpacking our stuff, we said goodbye to my mom and she left. No later than 2 minutes, she calls me to let me know that the guy is in the park. I told her to stop with the paranoia and leave him alone. At that same moment, my wife reminds me that rent is due in a few days and I have to go to the post office to send the check to our landlord. So I leave her home alone to keep unpacking while I go to run the errand. I get ready and head down to my car. Where I was parked is in front of the complex and across the street from the little park, where the guy from the stairwell is now seated on a bench. I see he's just there doing much of the same, just staring blankly into space. I make it to the post office, prepare the letter, and wait in line. It's been about 15 minutes since I left our apartment when my wife calls. I answer very relaxed. "What's up, babe?" She then whispers in a low tone, but I could hear the concern in her voice. "I think that guy from the stairwell is outside our door." The hairs on my neck stand up. I ask, "How does she know?" My wife says she heard a knock. When she looked through the peephole, she saw the guy wearing a brown vest. I asked if he was wearing a black shirt and jeans and had an afro hairstyle. She confirmed that it was him and that he's just hanging out in front of our door in the patio area. At that moment, I felt adrenaline kick in. I told my wife, "Don't open the door and call the cops." She whispered, "Okay," and we hung up. I bolted out of the post office and into my car, having my heart pumping out of my chest and stomach in a knot. My mind was racing on what this guy was trying to pull, concerned for the safety of my wife. When I got to our apartment 10 minutes later, the cops had gotten there extremely fast. We lived like 5 minutes away from the city's police department and courts, and were putting him in the back seat of the cop car. That's when a few neighbors that were home came out. We spoke to one female neighbor that said that the very same guy was lurking the complex late Saturday night and had knocked on our door. The arresting officer then approached my wife and me to get our statements. He asked if anyone else lived with us, and we informed him no. That's when he tells us that the guy is claiming he was there to see his girlfriend, that he was knocking on our apartment. My wife and I were in complete shock and fright, in disbelief of what might have happened if she had opened the door thinking it was me coming back to get something that I forgot. The guy clearly saw me leave our apartment and took the opportunity to go upstairs and knock on one of 2 possible apartments. Later on, was I subpoenaed to go to court. I found out the guy suffered from severe schizophrenia. I saw his mom there with him and couldn't help but feel sorry for the guy, that a part of his inappropriate behaviors is caused by something he can't control, which inversely affects his family and friends. But that being said, my wife's safety comes first, and all I requested when testifying was no jail time or anything serious, just to never come to the complex again, as my wife no longer feels safe in our apartment. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last attempt he made to go to our apartment. Continued. The first encounter with the stairwell guy had happened in early March 2016. 6 months had now passed and it was September. During the time till September, we had been subpoenaed to court in regard to the arrest and encounter. The charges laid on him were for trespassing and loitering. since nothing else had happened, thankfully. His mom was present for each appearance. His mix of diagnosis and knowing he had family dealing with the actions caused in part by his disease made me feel sad for him. However, my basic instinct still couldn't ignore that I had to protect my wife and our home. When asked to testify, I simply stated that we didn't want him to get a harsh punishment like jail time. The incident caused us to no longer feel safe at our home and apartment. The judge was lenient and warned the stairwell guy to no longer go to the premises, and that doing so would result in an arrest warrant and harsher punishment the next time. Since the incident, my wife no longer felt safe going towards our stairwell going up to our apartment, and due to my work schedule, I came home later around 8 or 9 p.m. and felt insecure and anxious being home alone. She pretty much wouldn't close herself at our apartment until I got home, not daring to go outside once there. If there were things she had to do, like errands, she made sure to do them before getting home or after I got there. Her fear that the stairwell guy or anyone else would be walking or stalking around the corner. It took a few months for her paranoia to go down and not feel as stressed about going in and out of our apartment. Life was getting back to normal, to the point we sort of never thought about the incident and just enjoyed life at our apartment again without as much fear. Though caution still lingered. By now, 6 months had passed and things were great. It was a nice September day, a Sunday in which I usually do laundry. I remember this day being surprisingly cool and windy, very odd for the time of year in hot and humid Miami. I remember this because the laundry room for our building is a non-air conditioned room located on the first floor in front of the stairwell that leads to our apartment. I was actually looking forward to doing laundry without sweating my ass off. Our laundry room had gated doors and windows which allowed air to pass through, and you could see out to the stairwell and by the window in the street. My wife and I break down the laundry chore and that she prepares and separates the clothes, and I go downstairs to put them in the machines. Prior to the incident, I would usually leave the door to our apartment unlocked, as it really only took me 10 minutes and I was just downstairs. After the incident, for some time, I began locking the door just to do that so that my wife wouldn't worry. But now 6 months had passed and our fear had gone down. So I leave our apartment with the laundry bags and figure I don't have to lock the door. I put on a podcast I usually like to listen to while doing chores and sort of doze away as I'm taking out the clothes and putting them in the machines. There was really nothing ominous or suspicious about this day. I was in a great mellow mood until a passing shadow on my peripheral caught my eye. I turned my head to the left, away from the washing machines I was packing. I could feel my stomach knot and heart start pounding, eyes widening in disbelief. The shadow that had passed by the laundry door and was now going up our stairs was none other than Stairwell Guy. He was wearing the same brown vest, dirty blue jeans, and a white t-shirt. His hair was now braided and looked as if he had shaved a goatee. I knew who he was right away, and his image had stayed in our minds for months prior. As he walked up the stairs, I could see his face had a very stern look, but still with the same blank and lifeless eyes previously. I dropped everything I was doing and quickly ran up the stairs behind him. At this point, he had made it to the top and was at our door. What I saw turned on my fight or flight instinct. He was reaching for the unlocked door handle. At this point, I was in fight mode, but natural instinct was to de-escalate first, so I raised my voice and said, "Excuse me, what are you doing? Can I help you?" This startled him a little bit, and he looked at me confused as if I were bothering him. He replied, "No, I'm good. Here to see my girlfriend." As he was saying that, I walked towards him and put my arm between him and the door and said, "Sorry, man, but you've got the wrong apartment." My heart was pounding through my chest. At that point, my wife had heard my voice and tried opening the door to see what I was up to. It opened about half a foot when, without thought, I palmed the door and forced it closed on her. But when she opened it, she saw who it was and instinctively went to her phone to call the police in a panic. Now, no longer in fear of her danger, but mine, not knowing what was going to happen between the guy and me. While that was going on inside, I simply told the guy while acting as a barrier between the door and him, "Look, I don't want any problems. I think you're confused. I think it's best if you just go. I don't want to call the police." He looked at me as if a little angry but backed away and started walking down the stairs. That's when he turned around with an angry face and said, "You got a problem with me, huh? You want to start something?" Every bit of me was ready to take it to a physical altercation if needed be, but I knew it was best to talk out of it. I simply replied in a neutral tone, "Dude, we don't want any problems, man. Just please leave us alone and there aren't any issues." He stares back for 3 seconds, sees I'm not lunging towards him or pulling away, and decides to leave without further words. As he went away, I made sure to look down from our patio area as he left the complex premises. At that point, I knock on the door and let my wife know that I'm okay and that he left. She opened the door crying and gave me a big hug, mentioning how scared she was for me. I had to comfort her that the situation was under control and that nothing really happened. 5 minutes later, the cop showed up. It was the same arresting officer. He came up and asked where he went. I pointed in the direction, but informed him I wasn't 100% sure. The officers couldn't find him, but they let me know due to the previous court order, an arrest warrant was now in effect and that they would be following up. Later, we got another subpoena for court. I followed up, and this time a restraining order was placed, and the judge had mentioned mandatory psych evaluations and therapy or facing actual jail time. Needless to say, after this second incident, my wife and I could no longer continue to live in that apartment. Our lease was up in November, so we decided to move. We found a really nice apartment down the street that was a gated community, which was a big plus by now. Since we moved, I didn't keep following up on the case. I think both times we got lucky, we took precautionary measures, and nothing serious ever really happened. That being said, the what could have been lingered in our minds and definitely changed how we felt about our own security at home. I'm an American-born woman, but my mom was born in South Africa, having emigrated in the 90s. Growing up, she always taught me to be on guard and to be extremely cautious. It was simple things, like driving up to an ATM at night. While my mom was using the machine, I had to look out one window while my sister would look out of another so that we could see if somebody was coming. I'd always wanted to visit South Africa, and when I was 17, I went as a graduation present. I ended up staying with my grandparents, who were both in their late 70s. My grandma was hell-bent on showing me as much of the country as possible, even though my grandpa Alzheimer's was worsening and traveling was becoming harder. Regardless, we took off from Johannesburg towards Cape Town. We would drive upward to 6 hours at a time. Anybody who has been to South Africa knows that you can go hundreds of miles and see nothing but grass. It was incredibly beautiful, but in some ways also eerie. Once we drove into wine country and the Cape, we began passing signs that said, "Don't pull over for people selling grapes," as we were near vineyards and people that would steal grapes would sell them on the side of the road. Around hour 3 or 4 of the day, my grandfather was getting antsy. He was obsessing with the GPS of the car, plugging it in and unplugging it, cursing and getting frustrated. Eventually, the thing just kept repeating, recalculating for hours on end. My patience was wearing thin, and I was trying to take it from him so I could fix it, but he wouldn't let me touch it. Finally, my grandma had enough and pulled over. This stretch of road was narrow and lined by trees. It was probably mid-afternoon, but we were the only car in sight and it was silent. My grandparents were reading the GPS instructions and arguing when my grandma turned around. "Keep watch out of the back window." I kind of smiled to myself, remembering what my mom used to say to me. I glanced at my phone, which had no service, and scrolled through my camera roll for the 300th time that day. I casually looked up and turned towards the back window, and my heart stopped. A man had come out of the forest and was running full sprint at our car. I found my voice and yelled, "Go," to my grandma, and her instincts kicked in and we took off. We drove away and the man was just left standing there. My grandma explained that often when travelers pulled over for the grape sellers, that there would be people waiting in the trees who would come out and rob you, sometimes violently. It doesn't get much more vulnerable than a teenage girl and an elderly couple, one of whom was suffering from Alzheimer's. So thank you, Mom, for making me cautious. In my 20s, I was a wire technician. For those unfamiliar with what that is, I basically installed internet and cable in people's houses. One day, I received a house call to install the internet only. This is yet another case of shit that happened to me while on the job. I've already posted previously about another situation when I was doing my job as a wire technician. These jobs are easy and quick for the most part, unless I have to run a new drop from the phone pole to the house. I drove up to the house and knocked. An older gentleman in his mid-50s came out. He was greasy looking and unkempt, and a testament to poor hygiene based on his odor and breath. I walk in and the house is poorly lit and has a rancid odor in the air which feels thick with humidity and stench. There are grease smears all over the floor and food with flies in the kitchen. I've only seen this sort of stuff in movies and never thought I'd actually encounter a place like this, but honestly I'm never surprised anymore. I just keep my poker face about me and pretend like it's any other house. In the living room, there's a relatively younger guy. Late 40s, heavier set, balding and unkempt as well. He's there watching some football game and follows me with his eyes as I'm walking through the house to the backyard. In the backyard, I do what I normally do, which is fine. with the cable box with the signal. I check the connection and try to install the Cat5 from there into the house. It's easier than it sounds. What didn't make it easy was the box being full of roaches and eggs. There wasn't an angle in this house that wasn't greasy, full of some sort of rot, pests, etc. As I was doing this, I was expecting in my head that I would have to then encounter the bedrooms, which would likely probably smell just as bad, if not worse, and I was dreading it for a little bit. I finish doing what I need to do outside, and I come inside, and I ask where the master bedroom is to install the modem. The younger one turns his head and looks at me and says, "We want the internet strong in the other room. Can you install it there?" I just tell him, yeah, no problem, and the older guy just kind of guides me to the other room. He points down the hallway, and I just go down and make a right. I open the door, and there's this bright pink room. The room itself is pristine, no dust or insects. The odor didn't permeate into this room, which had glade plugins. Every inch of this room was immaculate. At first glance, it looked like a little girl's room. Floral blankets, a twin-size bed, stuffed animals sitting on top of it, and Justin Bieber. A poster taped slightly crooked on the wall, along with other boy band posters. Now, this was long ago, so most of these musicians were underage at the time. There weren't any older musicians or pop stars on the wall. The moldings on the wall were freshly painted, as was the room. I thought to myself that maybe a girl lives with them too, who just doesn't share the same habits with hygiene. I'll keep it in mind, but this is my first glance at the room, so I'm not really looking deeply if you catch my drift. There's a computer desk on the right, I guess, which is where they want the modem, and shelves by the bed, and computer desk lined with DVDs. All I can think about is that it's probably just a lot of kid movies like Disney and Pixar stuff. As I'm taking the cable from the wall I ran through earlier to the liner, close to the desk, I'm sitting really close to one of the shelves, and I glance at it and was caught off guard to see that everything on the shelf was gay porn. As I'm looking at it, I'm realizing that they're all barely legal or guys pretending to be younger, but there is something very creepy about this. Not a single film on the shelf was anything outside of the genre. Curious, I take a minute to get up and look at the other shelf, and it's the same stuff. I haven't disconnected the previous service yet. As I look at the monitor of his computer, I see that it's on as well as the tower, but sleeping. I'm already really creeped out by the house, but pristine pink girls' room filled with gay porn of the barely legal genre, so I knocked the mouse a little bit to see if it'll wake up. And at this point, I'm just trying to see what I'm dealing with here. Lo and behold, these guys didn't lock their computer. There were JPEG thumbnails, but the thumbnails are large enough for you to make out more or less what it was. I was certain what I saw, and I don't really want to repeat it here, so I freaked out and quickly turned off the monitor. No, I didn't open any of the files, obviously, because I was really afraid to be right. I don't know what these guys are about, what they might have in this house, or what they're capable of. I'm a relatively big guy, but I'm unarmed, and they know this house better than I ever will, and I don't know if these guys have guns close by or anything else. I try to act cool and finish installing the modem. As I'm wrapping it up, the younger guy, the heavyset one, walks in and asked how the installation is going and if the signal was good. I just looked at him and said, "Yeah, the signal's good. I'm sure your daughter won't have any problems playing games or anything like that on the computers." He looks at me blankly for a minute, then he says I don't have a daughter. This is my room. I got up. I had my hammer to my side and my hand on it as if I were slightly leaning on it, so it doesn't look menacing, and I said, "Oh, my mistake. Well, I'm all done here, so if there's nothing else, I'll be on my way." I walk out of the house and I pack up my stuff and put it in the truck, and the whole time I thought eyes were on me as I was putting it all away. Close the truck. I look behind me and I can make out his silhouette from the curtain in the front. The glow of the TV in the living room was giving it away. Why the heck was he spying on me? I know why he was spying though, so I pretended I didn't notice him. I got in my truck and drove off. When I arrived to the yard 10 minutes away, I got out and wrote a statement of everything I saw to my manager, who happens to be on point with his work, and immediately reported this to corporate, flagging this account, then forwarded my statement to the police. What ended up coming out of that? I don't know. Driving home that night, all I kept asking myself was why the heck I always end up with a creepy job at the end of my shift almost every time. I was going through an old diary of mine and I found an entry I'd made 10 years ago to the day, in which I'd written about the time I got thoroughly creeped out and creeped on at the train station. So, on this creepy anniversary, let me recount the tale for you. First, a bit about me. I'm a woman and I had recently turned 18 when this story took place. though I looked a fair bit younger to most people. People frequently assumed that I was 16, partly because of the baby face genetics I have, but also because I had stupidly low self-esteem at the time, and I looked like a high school sophomore who didn't know how to dress themselves. I was tall and fat and not into makeup, and my idea of doing my hair was pulling an unbrushed mass into a ponytail. Fashion was a t-shirt with a pop culture reference on it and jeans I hadn't washed in a month. I was hardly the prize pig at the fair. This dunking on myself will become relevant later though, I promise. Anyway, so I was coming home from university and I needed to switch trains at South Yarrow Station. My next train wasn't due to arrive for another 15 minutes, so I was hanging around the station cafe, wondering if I really needed a potato cake. I was deep in thought about this when I felt somebody sidle up right behind me. I could feel their presence over my shoulder, so I stepped to the side, thinking they were trying to get past me, but they didn't move around. They shuffled closer so that they were less than a foot away, and muttered something to me. "Sorry, I didn't hear you. What was that?" I asked, turning around. I said, "Do you want to go get coffee?" Oh. The forwardness of the question kind of stumped me, so I just stood there for a second looking at this guy who'd approached me out of the blue. He was pretty normal looking, to be honest. Clean shaven, casually dressed, with medium length hair. He looked to be in his mid-early 30s. He was kind of weedy and a little taller than I was, making him quite tall because I'm 6 foot myself, and he had a nervous demeanor about him, like he couldn't seem to look me in the eye. Aside from his abruptness, nothing about him seemed out of the ordinary. He glanced at me, waiting for an answer to his question. My creep alarms weren't ringing, but I still wasn't in the habit of going out for drinks with strangers. "Coffee? Yeah, now's not a great time," I said with an apologetic shrug. "Gotta catch a train." "Oh." He looked down again. "Do you have to do that?" That's, weird. But I insisted that I did indeed have to because I was on my way to an appointment. A barefaced lie, but whatever got me out of this conversation quicker, you know? Then the question started. "So, what kind?" he asked. "What? What kind of appointment?" "The dentist." Right, so, what train are you getting?" The one to Sandringham?" "Why?" "Oh, I'm going to Alamein." "Aha, opposite direction." "Yeah, anyway, my train's leaving in a few minutes, so I should really be heading off." "What about tomorrow?" "What?" "We can go get coffee tomorrow, at 10. "Yeah, I don't know about that. I've got school tomorrow." "Well, you can skip it, right?" "Well, it's the first week, so I kind of have to go." "How about after?" "I think I'm meeting some friends after that, actually," I said. "Oh, but you can cancel with them, right? They'll understand." "I guess so." At this point, the guy chuckled and shook his head. He nudged my arm with his elbow. "I'm hitting on you, you know. Remember what I said about not being the prize pig? I was a depressed, insecure teenager who'd never been hit on before in her life, and when he said those words, something in my brain shifted. I sort of spent years believing that I was fundamentally unlovable. I stayed in toxic friendships because I didn't think I deserved any better, and I should have been grateful for any attention I got. It's like I was an orphan in a Dickens novel, and I had to cling to any crust of affection bread thrown my way because I didn't know where my next meal was coming from. Those feelings surged up, and the whole encounter with this dude flipped. He was no longer a stranger pestering me for coffee. No, suddenly he was somebody to whom I owed a debt. He was benevolent enough to find someone like me attractive, therefore I owed him. I smiled nervously. "Sorry, this is just the first time something like this has happened to me," I said. "Well," he said, "there's a first time for everything." Anyway, he keeps asking for me to meet him for coffee out at Hurstbridge, which is a train station 30 kilometers out of the Melbourne CBD. All for you non-Melburnians out there, it's also over an hour's trip by train. But like I said, I felt like I owed him, so I agreed. I told this guy I'd see what I could do, and he asked me like 5 times to promise him that I'd be there. Then he said something I didn't quite catch. It sounded like he said, "I've already had some partners. Is that okay?" And I assumed he meant that he'd been with people before, so he wasn't a complete novice, as opposed to me, who just admitted that this was the first time they'd been hit on. I said that it was totally fine, but what he actually said was, "I already have some partners." And when I said it was fine, he smiled to himself. "Oh, that's fine, eh? You like that too?" He nodded. Nice. Haha. Finally, I'm promiscuous." I didn't even know what to say to that. Did he mean polyamorous? No clue. My train had just started pulling in, so I took a step towards the ramp down to the station, giving him a hasty goodbye. He was standing in my way and didn't move when I indicated I wanted to get past. "You'll meet me tomorrow at Hurst Bridge, right? At 12? Promise?" I said yes, sure, fine, whatever. but he didn't move, and he stuck out his hand for me to shake. I'm James, by the way. I'm Meg, I say, giving him the nickname of one of my fantasy roleplay OCs. As I reached out to shake his hand, he pulled me into a hug. I don't even like being hugged by my own family members, so this caught me completely off guard, and I could do nothing but stand there as his hands rubbed up and down my back, lingering on where he felt my bra strap through my shirt. He continued to hug even after my arms dropped down to my sides and I stood frozen, watching my train leave the station. Oh no, he said, finally ending the embrace. Did you miss your train? It's okay. The next one's in 15 minutes. I'll wait for you. And I didn't know what to do because I did not want to be around him anymore, but I still felt like I owed him something. Politeness, at least. There was another train leaving the station in a few minutes, and it wasn't on my line, but I just wanted to be out of there. I told James I could catch that train instead and take a bus to my appointment so he didn't need to wait on me. He insisted. He reached down and held my hand as we walked toward the train station. Oh, cool, he said, when he saw where the train was going. I'm going to Frankston, too. We can go together. He told me earlier he was going to Alamein, remember? Completely different line. My hand went limp in his grasp, but he didn't let go. My brain was buzzing with plans of how to get out of that situation. I want to tell him to screw off, but part of me didn't see that he'd done anything wrong. He was socially awkward and overly friendly, and he asked me out for coffee. Those weren't inherently bad things. If anything, I was the bad guy for not giving him a chance, I thought. It's not like guys were beating down a path to my door. I should be lucky somebody was interested in me at all. Like, I could go up to the train station staff and say, what? Help, this man asked me out for coffee and gave me a goodbye hug. They would probably tell me to get a grip. I was thinking too hard to pay attention to what James was saying, but I eventually tuned in and realized he was talking to me about school. He asked me if it was a casual day at school, or if my school did not have uniforms, or if I was just skipping today. He said with a fond chuckle that he used to go home at lunch and skip school all the time. Man, did he think I was still in high school? I clarified and told him that I'm actually at university. He said, oh, and dropped the subject. The train arrived, and since it was peak hour, it was packed. Part of me was hoping that in the rush of people, James and I would get separated, but no such luck. He pulled me on board, and we ended up squished together, me with my back against the doors and him blocking me into a corner. The doors on my side weren't opening for a while. If I wanted to rush out another stop, I'd have to elbow my way through the crowded carriage. But even if I told James I need to get off the train, he could block my exit again and pull me into another hug until the doors closed. He didn't tell me what stop he was getting off at either, so he could say he needs to get off at my stop too, and follow me wherever I happened to go. James essentially had me trapped. At this point, I was barely paying attention to anything he was saying, too busy focusing on potential escape plans. So far, the best idea I had was to spontaneously throw up on him and make my escape in the disgusted confusion. But unfortunately, I was blessed with an iron stomach and haven't vomited in 11 years or so. So maybe not the best idea. I thought about faking a phone call, but he was close enough to see my phone screen and know that nobody was on the line. In retrospect, I could have pretended to text something. Hindsight, you know. James leant in a little closer and patted me on the arm. Are you excited about tomorrow? Tomorrow? Our date. Coffee. You promised, right? Right. He did promise, he said, and he looked me in the eye. He hadn't done much of that through our entire conversation, so it startled me. He kept saying, you promised. I nodded, unsure of what else to do or say. I've been hurt before, you know, he said, looking back down at the ground again. It's not very nice. He sounded so sad that I felt bad for being so creeped out by him. Maybe he was just really socially awkward and had a hard time getting dates, or maybe this was him trying his best. As a fellow socially awkward person, surely I could understand the struggle. Surely I could give him a chance. James glanced me up and down. So, what are you going to wear to our coffee date? How will I recognize you? Shrugged. I'll probably wear this, I guess. It was quite hot that day, and I was wearing lace-up sandals I'd borrowed from my mom. Might class it up with some socks, shoes, maybe a hat. Hey, you know what I like? I love those really long socks. You know what I'm talking about? Like thigh highs? I think I have a pair of those. Yeah, I like those. I have a fetish for them. Haha. Yeah, he's just really awkward. Just have to be polite and give him a chance. James nodded to himself. Yeah, those and the uniforms with the short skirts. Those are cool. Mm-hmm. He's just trying his best. Benefit of the doubt and all. I owe him that much. Hey, James said, chuckling and leaning in closer. I've told you 2 of my fetishes. You should tell me 2 of yours. I looked at him like he just asked me to hand over 2 of my teeth. I stammered something like, "Oh, well, I don't know about that." But he chided me and gently bumped me on the shoulder. "Come on," he wheedled. "It's fine, I won't judge even if it's bad. I've only told you 2 of my tamer ones. I can get really kinky, you know. Do you want me to guess what yours are?" I think I've said something about how he can't guess because I don't have any, and he must have picked up on the curtness of my tone because he started hushing and reassuring me that it was fine, that he's done a lot of that stuff before, and a lot of the girls don't think they're into it at first, but if it's done right, then they change their minds. I said I'll bet, and resumed looking out the window. The train whistled as we pulled into a station. The next stop, I knew, faced my side of the carriage, so the doors would open and I'd have an out. I didn't want James to think I was mad at him or wanted to leave in case he tried to stop me. So when he started making small talk again, I participated with earnest. He didn't talk about fetishes, but he did keep touching me, brushing my arm, patting the back of my hand, resting his hand on my hip, and didn't seem to care that I didn't reciprocate his touch and, in some cases, visibly pulled away. We arrived at the next stop and the doors opened behind me. The carriage was less crowded than it had been when we first got on, and a few more people filed out. I stretched and moved in the newfound space, and James leant back a fraction to avoid getting hit in the face with my arms. I told him to back up a smidge more because I needed to tighten the laces of my sandals. He obliged and I bent over, turning to the right a little bit so that I was parallel to the door. I tugged aimlessly at the string, waiting until the door started beeping that they were about to close, and then I lunged out. I hit bang to get to the door as they slid shut, so I kind of stumbled out of the carriage, but I was out before James registered what had happened. I turned and watched him approach the closed doors, repeatedly pressing the button to open them. In retrospect, I shouldn't have stopped because I had no plan of what to do next if the doors opened and let him out. Fortunately, he just waited a second too long because the train had already started to move. We locked eyes and he stared at me, his face cold and expressionless as the train pulled away. I wanted to get on a train going back the way I'd just come, but it wasn't coming for another 10 minutes, which would be more than enough time for James to get off at the next stop and board that same train coming back this way. I could walk around the block a few times and wait for a few trains to go past, but what if he came back here and started looking for me? Or if I did manage to avoid him at the station, who's to say he wouldn't try to find me at South Yarra, where we'd first met? Fortunately, there was a tram line close by, so I decided to screw that train BS and get out of Dodge and on the light rail. As it turned out, that tram ended up going past a stop on the line I wanted to get on in the first place, so I was able to make it home without too much hassle, albeit like an hour later. For the longest time, I thought I was overreacting and that he was just an awkward guy with an odd approach for picking up women. It was my fault it got as far as it did because I was only giving him soft no's, like making excuses to leave and pulling away from his touch. I was equally in the wrong because my no wasn't explicit, even though my brain was screaming at me to be polite and that I owed him niceness for daring to take an interest in me. It wasn't until years later did I realize how warped that line of thinking was, and it also took a while for me to really piece together the fact that he asked me out on a date while assuming I was still in high school, and then later told me about his schoolgirl uniform fetish, which is not a great look. And also, regardless of if I was 18 or 28, he still prevented me from catching my train in the first place. He pulled me into a hug without asking. He continued to hug me even when I stopped reciprocating, and only let go when he heard the train leave. He knew I needed to go and he wouldn't let me, and that's messed up. I never did see James again, but I was paranoid about swapping trains at South Yarra Station for the longest time, and I still haven't been to Hurst Bridge. This was back in 2009. I was 15 and starting my freshman year in high school. The first 2 months were great. I was meeting new people, catching up with friends from middle school, and settling in. One day, I was drawing a picture on my binder and having fun. A girl in my maths class appeared in front of my desk. She seemed interested in my artwork and introduced herself. We will call her Pam. Pam was abnormally short for her age and had greasy curly hair, a face and chest covered in acne, orange teeth, and a strange gaze. She wasn't looking at me or around me, she was looking through me. I ignored the uneasy feeling from her gaze and thought it was just me being anxious about meeting somebody new. I was quiet and insecure in some ways. I usually hung out with nerds and geeks, so I would feel more social and accepted. I introduced myself to her and asked her if she liked art. I love art. I draw too, she said, while maintaining her intrusive eye contact. Me. Well, that's pretty cool. Maybe you could show me your art sometime. She kept her eye contact steady like she was waiting for me to say more. I awkwardly looked back down at my binder and kept drawing. She seemed to get the point and walked away. Pam came back about 10 minutes later with a specific piece of art and put it on top of my binder. It was shaky line work with no erasable marks. It was my drawing from a week ago. She had somehow taken it from my backpack and traced it and sloppily colored it with a Sharpie. Wait a minute, I said while checking my backpack. Yes, my drawing was stolen. I immediately got annoyed. Hey, you stole that from me, I said while crumbling the paper up. I had a quick childish temper back then. No, I didn't. This is mine, she said with a blank look on her face. She snatched the crumpled drawing from me and ran back to her desk. She didn't look embarrassed and she didn't look mad. She just grinned and stared at me for the rest of class. At first I thought I overreacted, that I just made an idiot out of myself since the whole class was watching. But then I realized that Pam was enjoying the drama. I then became her target for the rest of the year. I avoided her like the plague for the next month or so. She wasn't normal whatsoever and she creeped me the heck out. It didn't stop her from approaching me. I noticed every week or so my drawings would go missing. My friends would call her out for stealing and tracing, and she would somehow cause harm to them. She then lured my best friend into being alone with her, and she had claimed she was returning the drawings and she didn't want to see me. My best friend went to retrieve these drawings and Pam sucker punched her in the nose. My best friend was in shock and she ran to the office to tell an adult what happened. But it wasn't on camera, so they also claimed that Pam was a sweet girl and that she would never hurt anybody. Two things here. Pam had obviously put an effort to get on the good side of anyone with authority, and she lured my friend into the girls' locker room knowing there was no camera. This freaked out all of my friends. I was scared, but the fear turned into rage. Who did she think she was? No one had even thought she would go that far, but it got much worse. I confronted her and I told her that if she ever touched me or one of my friends again, I'd follow her home and beat her ass myself. She seemed to be enjoying these threats. She grinned with her nasty teeth showing. Her breath smelled like a carcass. Don't threaten me with a good time, she said, forcing out a laugh. Any adult I told about this would ignore me, and my parents were too busy fighting each other to listen at all. And the school staff didn't care about drama. The only people I could trust were the ones directly involved and my brothers. Nobody could do anything without proof, and Pam was sneaky. I was stuck. I was furious and I wanted revenge. Pam showed up the next day with a picture of me and my two brothers at the Detroit Zoo. She had shown it to the other students. She claimed that the man in the picture was her boyfriend, my oldest brother. She went into detail about how she had sex with him 3 times a day. She had ruined me mentally. How did she get that picture? It was in my locker. She had found out my combination. I was feeling pretty exposed and small at this point. Finally, the most disturbing thing she pulled, sadly not the last thing though, was that she decided that she wanted me to get expelled. She went into the bathroom during lunchtime and did something crazy, and said that I was the one who did it to her. I only know this because a girl from my English class witnessed the whole thing. She even asked Pam if she was okay. Pam answered with, "I'm fine, why do you ask?" As if she didn't just basically go through a full psychotic break. The witness held. I was escorted out of my class by 2 school security officers. They interrogated me for an hour. They asked me where I was at lunch and if I was sure I wasn't lying, and they asked me if I had a violent family. I rolled my eyes after they told me I was a liar and called my brother. He came in a half hour later and told them what Pam had been doing and that they could lose their jobs for interrogating me. They seemed to listen to him because the principal was his old science teacher and they got along very well. Thankful for small towns. I managed to get 3 witnesses in. I chose the girl from my English class who saw Pam do what she did in the bathroom. I chose my best friend who got punched in the face, and I chose an actual teacher that saw Pam take things out of my backpack. Pam claimed that I borrowed her books and she was taking them back. I was in the bathroom. With all of this proof, they had no choice but to search Pam's locker. They found photos of me and my family. They found my schedule and an unbelievable amount of drawings I had done. It's like she had a shrine and wanted to be me. I was horrified. They asked me if we had been in a relationship. I said no and that I'm straight. She ended up failing her art class because she had used all of my art for her grades. She was suspended and seemed to have disappeared after getting caught. I don't blame her. The whole school was talking about it. I even got some apologies from Pam's little jerk circle. They told me they were too afraid to do anything about it and that she would show up at their homes randomly after school. She had so many people wrapped around her nasty little fingers. I had a feeling that Pam had something horrible happen to her as a child, and that's why she was the way she was. Last I heard, she pushed her grandmother down the stairs and left her there until the cops showed up. A concerned elderly neighbor heard yelling in a usually quiet house. I'm a guy, mid-20s, living in the US. This happened a few months back, and I like to write about it now. About a year ago, I decided to quit my corporate job of several years. Long story short, I was absolutely miserable and I needed a serious change. So I dipped into my savings, packed up my only necessary belongings, and moved from my hometown on the East Coast to XY, some 2,000-mile cities away. Which was an impulsive decision for sure, but one I don't regret. My first month, I sputtered through a series of odd jobs, casually drifting from one gig to another as I tried to figure out what I really wanted out of my life. Eventually, an acquaintance suggested that I try bartending. At the time, I had no experience at all, but I thought, screw it, why not put myself out there? Couldn't hurt to try. I applied to all the LGBTQ bars in town. I'm gay. I figured that a job at one of these places would be a good way to integrate myself into the community, maybe even meet some guys without having to resort to Grindr and the like. I quickly hit it off with the owner of a neighborhood pub, and he hired me on the spot, promising to mentor me in all things booze related. The following months were some of the best of my life. Met a lot of great people and gained a lot of perspective. I'm now starting grad school, but I still work at that same bar a couple nights a week. That's where the following incident occurred a few months ago. I should mention that this bar is on the corner of the main road and a quiet side street. That's important. Anyways, around 5:45 p.m., I parked my car halfway down the side street, which at that time was lined with cars, and I walked back to the pub. After taking some deep breaths and doing some quick mental prep, despite the nature of my job, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool introvert. I walked through the front door, tossed my keys into my knapsack, and tossed my knapsack over the main bar. It's my routine, what I always do. Only bartenders are ever allowed behind the bar, and I've never really felt the need to lock my personal belongings in the back office. It's just not that kind of place. Almost all of the patrons are quality people, hard workers, community members, younger, older, and everything in between. People who generally deserve a break every now and then, if only in the form of a cocktail or three. That being said, it's not cheers. Admittedly, this job has really made me wise to what so many women must have to endure on a regular basis. Not everybody is respectful of personal boundaries, especially when you're new or fresh meat. I've been leered at and eye fucked. I've had guys reach out and run their hands through my hair, stroke my chest, squeeze things they shouldn't, forcefully pull me closer and whisper all the things they like to do, only to get righteous and angry when I don't enthusiastically reciprocate. My first week, my boss told me half-jokingly that this is a gay bar, there's no such thing as sexual harassment. I guess because they're dudes and I'm a dude and we're all dudes, I'm supposed to man up and deal with it, which for the most part I do and did. The money's consistently good, but I still can't say that I'm entirely comfortable with everything. Double standards suck. Anyways, Monday evenings can be hit or miss. That one Monday was a miss, but by the time 10 p.m. rolled around, only a couple of folks remained. That's when Vern walked in. I'd guess that Vern was in his mid to late 30s. Solid build, clean-shaven, average-looking. Sort of impeccably anonymous. I'd never seen him before. He sat down at the end of the counter, on the very last stool, next to where I enter and exit from behind the bar, and where I usually have my belongings. He seemed to be a pretty affable guy, and nothing about him seemed explicitly out of the ordinary. But admittedly, something about him didn't sit quite right with me. He almost seemed a little bit too ordinary, like conspicuously so. He was dressed down, if that makes any sense. It's hard to describe. Think along the lines of someone who might spend an hour trying to style perfect bedhead. Anyway, at some point the topic got around to video games, which I love, and for a good 10 minutes we discussed some upcoming releases we were both apparently excited about. Eventually I had to excuse myself to help another customer, as well as finish a couple of other tasks that still needed doing. But Vern said that it was no big deal, and of course I need to do my job. Cool, no problem. As I walked around the pub, cleaning this and that, I couldn't help but notice that whenever I happened to look in Vern's direction, he was already looking at me. This is something I've gotten used to as a bartender, but again, something in particular just didn't sit right. Sometimes he would look away, but most of the time he wouldn't, giving me a tiny impenetrable smile. This went on for a while, nearly 2 hours. I'd walk up to him occasionally, ask him if he needed anything, and we'd have a brief exchange. I'd go back to my other duties, and he would just keep on staring. So on and so on. In all that time, he only ordered one more soda, and he didn't talk to anyone else. He had his smartphone on the counter in front of him, but I never once saw him looking at it. As I said before, I've experienced worse, so I figured that he was probably socially awkward, or maybe just lonely. Whatever he was, though, he wasn't particularly subtle. By midnight, Vern was the only person still sitting at the bar. There were 2 guys playing pool in the back room, out of sight, and a few dudes smoking on the patio, but Vern and I were the only ones in the main room. In that sort of situation, I'd feel rude to not chat up the only person left in the vicinity. It's part of my job to make people feel welcome after all. But despite it being a super slow night, I felt drained and I just couldn't find the energy to strike up a genuine conversation with somebody who was making me feel like I was on full display. I figured it would be a good time to go to the storeroom and grab a few cases of beer that I had to restock soon anyway. I excused myself and told Vern that I was going to the office and would be right back, but if he needed anything, he could holler. When I made it inside the office, I immediately felt a sense of relief, like I'd finally made it backstage after a gruelingly long performance. It took me about 30 seconds to grab the stuff I needed, but I decided to sit down and mess around on my phone for a few minutes, enjoying my solitude. I stayed there until it felt like I'd been away from my post for a bit too long, at which point I grabbed the beer cases and headed back to the bar. To my surprise, Vern was gone by the time I got back, and there was a $20 bill under his glass. I suddenly felt guilty. Not because I just made money off of him, though of course that was appreciated, but because he was really just some horny closeted dude who didn't know how to interact with other dudes, and maybe the money was his only reliable way of expressing gratitude for the company. Maybe I had misread the cues and was projecting my own insecurities onto his admittedly awkward behavior. Maybe, just maybe. In any case, he was gone now and I still had more to do, so I placed the cash in my tip jar and mentally thanked him for it. I began going about my tasks for the rest of the shift and quietly put Vern out of my head. A couple of hours later, around 1 a.m. I would say, I escorted the final stragglers outside and closed the front door. I work alone on Monday nights, so it usually takes me a little less than an hour to finish my tasks after closing. As per usual, I put on some chill music and went on autopilot. I finished everything around 2 a.m. After turning off the last few lights, I grabbed my knapsack, set the alarm, and headed out the front door, which locks on its own. I started to amble down the street towards my car, the only one left on the block. All I could think about was how badly I needed to pack a bowl and jump into the shower. When I reached the back of my car, I absent-mindedly yanked it open and threw my knapsack into the back seat, slamming the door closed. I stepped up to the driver's side door and pulled the handle and climbed inside. Only as my ass made contact with the seat and I reached my hand towards the open door did I realize I hadn't taken my car keys out of my bag. I never actually unlocked my car. A wave rolled over me like I had jumped into the ocean, and I saw something in the periphery of my vision. I kid you not, man. There he was, just sitting there in my passenger seat. I am not at all ashamed to admit I screamed, literally. The driver's side door was still open, but I didn't and couldn't move. I just stared at him absolutely dumbfounded. "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you," Vern said. I didn't immediately respond, so he quickly followed up with, "I thought we could hang out, maybe play some games together." Then, like it was nothing, he handed me my car keys, which he had obviously stolen out of my bag during those minutes I was in the office, and apologized to me again, presumably for having my keys in the first place. Then he offhandedly gave me an address and said that he didn't live far away if I was interested. I'd like to say that I was this close to grabbing him by the collar and beating the absolute heck out of him, but something in my gut urged me to strongly play along, to pretend like this situation wasn't completely insane. The street was deserted. I had no idea if he was armed or how unhinged he really was. Too many variables. "No worries, dude," I said casually, like he was an old childhood friend who just flown into town to surprise me on my birthday. "Just wasn't expecting to see you, is all." I had no idea what I should say. It might have been a stupid decision on my part, and there were probably 1,001 things I should have done instead, but I tried to genuinely meet him halfway and just be as gracious as possible and calm as possible. That sounds cool, but it was a crazy long night for me and I'm really tired. Can we rain check? A few silent moments passed by, but I suppose I sounded genuine enough because he crossed his arms and simply said, "Okay." I asked him if he had his car parked nearby and he said no. I didn't press the issue further, and again, dumb, I told him outright that I'd be happy to drop him off at his place, at which point we could trade numbers and make plans in the morning after I'd gotten some sleep. Somehow appeasement seemed safer than flat-out confrontation or running away, or suggesting Uber or whatever. I didn't want to offend him or make him feel like he was in the wrong. I had no idea what he was capable of, whether he was actually malevolent or just an alien from another social dimension. He quietly agreed to the ride. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. On the way, I asked him about how his day went and what games he liked and other random BS. I mentioned multiple times that I was really glad to meet another gamer, that it would be fun to share the hobby with someone else. Basically, I said whatever it took to keep the conversation light and flowing, but he didn't say much at all aside from occasionally directing me left or right, and whatever he did say had a sort of petulant tone to it. I felt like I was driving home a psychotic toddler who had just refused McDonald's. He looked out the passenger window the entire ride. Occasionally I would glance over at him, but mostly I tried to keep my eyes forward because I found that focusing on the road made me feel centered. Of course, a part of me wishes now that I had acted more assertively, whipping around a sharp turn and sending him flying effortlessly out the window. You know, something badass like that. But being friendly or accommodating was really the only thing that seemed appropriate at the time. My grandpa always said kill him with kindness, and I disagree that's always the correct solution. But it's what I did that night and it worked. I considered driving directly to a police station, but I wasn't terribly familiar with the neighborhood. And I didn't want to rile him up by taking out my phone. Before long we arrived. The destination was a small park, in a suburb that I'd only driven through a couple of times previously. He said he would walk the rest of the way, and at his request, I brought the car to a stop at the corner. There was a short, somewhat terrifying lull before either of us said anything or made any sort of move. I offered to put my number in his phone, but he refused and simply said thanks and got out of the car. As soon as he closed the door, I hightailed it down the street. I drove aimlessly for about a mile or two before I pulled over and just idled on the side of the main road. I sat in silence for a few moments and then called my boss, who at this point is a good friend. Honestly, I didn't care that it was 2 a.m. after that point. He picked up after a couple of rings, and I quickly regurgitated everything that had happened. He was a good sport about it and didn't just play it off for laughs, instead expressing legitimate concern. We had a mandatory staff meeting that week in which everybody was told they needed to be on guard and how the bar would be installing several cameras for extra security. Thankfully, I haven't seen Vern again since that night, nor have any of the other bartenders. I recently moved with my mom to a very low-class apartment complex, the sort that is government subsidized and you hear fights, bass, and yelling all night. I was 16 at the time, and we had one small dog, our Jack Russell Terrier, with us, and for the first months it was very nice. My mom was scared of our downstairs neighbor though, a tattooed man who looked straight out of jail and lived with his mom, but he was actually incredibly sweet. He helped us move in furniture and gave us cookies for the holidays. The apartments are set up with 8 apartments in a building, 4 on one bottom floor and 4 on top. I was on the second story front apartment. Behind our apartment, still on the second story, we shared a wall, was a man who lived alone. Never saw him at first. He drove a bright yellow Prius, but the first time I met him was terrible. It was about 5:45, and I was taking my dog out to go to the bathroom before I left for school. I transferred to a school far away as my old one had too much crime and I nearly got knifed, so we had a rather long drive. I was about 10 feet from the bottom of the stairs, and all of a sudden, the old man comes out of his apartment and stops about halfway down his stairs. I looked up long enough to say a polite hello and then looked away as my dog sniffed around. He returned the hello with a "How are you?" and I responded in kind. Nothing really felt odd, and I guess I didn't suspect anything too bad from him because he was really old, and slowly the questions became more personal. He asked me my name and he told me how he used to date a woman in New York with that same name. He said I was so much prettier than she was though, and 16-year-old girls apparently with insecurity issues dig that, so I didn't object. He had started to inch down the stairs toward me. My dog pretty much ignored as he finally found a spot and went about his work. Eventually, he invited me to his house for some breakfast. This is where I started to get scared. I never thought somebody would make advances like this to me since it was winter and I was bundled up in a thick coat and didn't look that attractive at the moment. I said no, taking a step back as he took one forward. I eyed the bottom of my stairwell, but I felt like I was assuming too much. I had real problems in asserting myself at this time. His offer escalated into inviting me in for champagne. I told him I was underage, and he asked again. I repeated 3 times to him that I was underage, but thanked him for the generous offer. I should have just said I wasn't interested. He told me it's okay because it's pink champagne. That is when I put my foot down, and sadly, it was mainly because he assumed that I would like pink things because I am a female. I said no, and I ran with my dog back to my apartment and instantly relayed the story to my mom. She didn't seem to believe me, and she didn't think anyone actually lived in the apartment since we never see or really hear anyone. The only people I have seen are employees, babe, she said. Now stop this nonsense and let's take you to school. I went to school and I was pretty upset. I was angry at my mom, who thought I was lying, but I had somebody on my side. If any of you are familiar with DARE program, it's when a cop comes to elementary schools and teaches you about drugs and alcohol. He actually ended up working at the middle school my mom worked at, and when I was there bringing my mom something, I don't remember what it was, I told him about it. I ended up bringing him a picture of his license plate, and he took me to the station to file a full report. The man was 76 years old and had been doing the same thing to all the little girls in this development. The officer who took me to file the report went to talk to him, and he gave a bunch of excuses. I just had heart surgery, or my eyes are bad. I didn't know she was 16, he said. I only said it 3 times very clearly. He never spoke to me again, but whenever I was outside, he would watch me through his blinds. It was so weird and made me so uncomfortable, I ended up promising my mom if she took the dog out, I would not only do the dishes, but also clean the entire apartment. She agreed to all and eventually apologized for not listening. But from now on, when I have problems, I go to my dad first because he actually believes me. I work in a very small suit and tuxedo boutique inside of a shopping mall that has the motto, "You're going to like the way you look, I guarantee it." I started working there in April, and by June I was opening and closing primarily by myself. I spend the majority of my time on the clock manning the store by myself. I also live in a surprisingly diverse Midwestern city. We have a lot of foreign customers, and most of the time these customers are no trouble. They may speak limited English, but are friendly, patient, and understanding, as I try to explain that no, they can't buy our rental tuxedos, or no, we don't have rental items available for them to try on. Now, I'm a big girl, which is relevant, and married, also relevant. I'm also a very friendly and outgoing individual who genuinely enjoys customer service. A middle-aged African man comes into the store. I have 2 customers, just browsing, and another that I'm measuring, so I call out a greeting and tell him to let me know if he needs any help. I finish measuring, check out my other customers, and make my way over to my latest customer. Let's call him A. Me. Sorry about your wait, sir. How can I help you? Well, I'm just looking at these shirts. They are very nice. You're very nice. Me. Well, thank you, sir. Do you know your size? A. You know, you are very pretty, and I'm from Africa. I like big women. At this point, I kind of raise my eyebrows at him. I'm not ashamed of my weight. I rock it. But I am very clearly married. My ring is sort of hard to miss, and I don't wear a lot of other jewelry. Me. Well, thank you. My husband would agree with you. A. Well, he is a very lucky man. How do you stay so fat and beautiful? He asked. Excuse me? Sir, that is really not an appropriate question. Can I help you find a shirt? No, really, how do you do it? Me. Feel free to browse around. If you need any help, please let me know. I walk away, keeping an eye on this guy, but going and checking on my other customers. An elderly gentleman, let's call him EG, can tell that I'm flustered and asks if I'm okay. It's a really small store, so he obviously overheard the conversation. A finally comes over again, and keeping the conversation appropriate this time, asks me to find him a few shirts. We don't have the correct size, but I'll find them in another location. A mentioned that he's a trucker and asks if we can send them to a store near his home where he can pick them up. This is no problem at all, and I get on the phone to start making arrangements for that. Suddenly, this exchange happens. E.g. Hey, what are you doing? A. Nothing, sir. What do you mean? I heard your phone. You're taking pictures of her. I immediately whip around. A has his phone out pointed at me and is very obviously taking pictures of me behind my back. You need to leave right now. No, I'm a customer. You can't make me leave. Me. Sir, I do not want you to take pictures of me, so please delete the ones you have and leave. I'll get these shirts sent to California for you, but you need to leave. A. I'm a customer, though. EG walks out of the store and gets on the phone. I can hear him yelling at someone on the other line. I immediately put the counter between me and A and face him. A starts talking again about how pretty and fat I am and how he's a trucker, and how next time he comes here maybe I won't be married and we can go out for dinner. I am insisting the whole time that he needs to leave. EG comes stomping back in the store with mall security on his heels. He points at A and says, "That's the jerk." Mall security doesn't even bat an eye. We may have rent-a-cops, but they really watch out for the mall employees and don't take a shit from people. They grab A and escort him out of the mall. One cop stays behind to take statements from EG and me. When EG left the store, I gave him a huge hug and thank you. Mall security made sure that A left the premises and then hung around my end of the mall until closed to make sure he didn't try to come back. I never did get him to delete those pictures. I told this story to a friend recently and they seemed genuinely surprised. I guess I thought doing etching, similar things happen to everyone. They suggested sharing my story, so this seemed a fitting place. It was the summer of '98 in the hot California desert. I was 5 years old riding shotgun in my mom's crappy little convertible, and it barely ran, but the seats were red velvet, the radio worked, and being able to take the top down almost made up for the lack of air conditioning. My days were normally spent at daycare or the babysitters, as my single student mom put in long hours at her job to provide for us. I didn't mind, it just meant the days like today were even more special. My mom was driving me across the next county to my cousin's house for a birthday party that was going to be complete with dress-up games and ice cream cake. To truly seal the deal, she had taken us to McDonald's right before we headed out on our drive. I got a Happy Meal with a stuffed Simba from the Lion King as my toy. That will be important later. Our convertible eased onto the motorway, and for the most part, it was a pleasant and uneventful ride. I remember the loud noise of the cars and the hot wind. I first became aware of the truck as it lays on its horn behind us. I turned in the seat to see a huge great monster of a truck tailgating us ridiculously close. As soon as it was safe, my mom changed to the slow line on the right of the motorway, assuming he would pass us, and he pulls level to our car, rolls the windows down and begins screaming at us to pull over, in the middle of the desert on the motorway. My mom ignores him and tells me to do the same. I remember feeling uneasy but less scared than annoyed. Kind of like, dude, come on, this is my day to have fun. Leave us alone. Besides, I wasn't really a stranger to angry shouting men, even at that age. Unfortunate but true. I think the lack of reaction irritated the man, or maybe this was his plan the entire time. But he swiftly pulls into our lane and essentially forces us off the road onto the shoulder. My mom does her best to maintain control of the car and not make contact with the other vehicle, but that's pretty much impossible. The unmistakable crunch of metal rings out and both vehicles come to a stop. Again, on the side of the desert motorway. Not exactly anyone around to help or places to go. My mom checks me to see if I'm okay and remains in her seat. Now, if I were her, I don't know if I would have waited to confront this man with a child in my car after that's done. However, my mom is and always will be the toughest nails type of gal who isn't afraid of anything, especially when she feels she has been wronged, and of course she had no idea what was about to happen next. In a flash of anger and cursing, the man is at the driver's side door, screaming about the damage to his car and how it was caused because of the food trash that had been flying out of the convertible, landing on his front window and blocking the view. He starts demanding compensation and that my mom get out of the car and come and look at his car. At this point, my mom refuses to get out of the car. She points at a call box a fair distance away. Remember those? And says it's best to call the police and let them handle this. Not the answer the angry man wanted. In one fluid movement, this man grabs the back of my mother's head and once, twice, 3 times smashes it into the steering wheel, leaving her unconscious. Lifting her like a sack of potatoes, he drops her on the side of the road and jumps into the driver's seat, key still in the ignition, and starts the car up. I haven't even reacted yet. I think I was in an absolute state of shock. It wasn't until I felt the car moving and getting back on the road that I registered what really happened. When it hit me hard. I went ballistic. I was no longer just annoyed with this man. I was now furious for what he did. I remember I held my stuffed Simba by the tail as I climbed out of my seat and began screaming while whipping the man in the face, trying to blind him. My battle cry, I'll always remember this, was, "You're the meanest man in the whole world." I clawed and kicked and gave no care what was going to happen to me, just that this man was going to pay. This led to a couple of things happening. First, I made it impossible to drive that car safely, and he ended up crashing into another shoulder. Second, by this time people had started to see a combination of a woman lying on the shoulder in a convertible with the Tasmanian devil of a 5-year-old beating up on some creeper and began to alert authorities. I don't remember too much after that. I remember the cops coming and sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They gave me a teddy bear and asked me a lot of questions, and my grandma picked me up. My mom went to the hospital where she thankfully didn't have any major damage, just a busted nose and some whiplash. Never made it to my cousin's party and never saw that white convertible again. I'll always be thankful for my main man Simba having my back through all of that. I don't know what that man's intentions were. Looking back and knowing the area we lived in, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if drugs played a major part in all of this. But yeah, creepy carjacker. Please stay away.